Welcome to Deep Sleep Story. Tonight you'll walk the final quiet miles of a long journey, through snow-covered mountains, into a forgotten village, and into the heart of an oath that still echoes beyond battle. Close your eyes. Let your breath slow. And drift into the stillness of a world where loyalty lives past the sword. Before the snow, before the pain and the long path through the mountains, there were 3 boys who stood together in the hall of the oaken flame, hearts hammering, breath held, blades drawn. Kael, Beran, Tomas. Their cloaks still new, their hands unscarred. But their eyes already carried the shape of men. They were not born warriors. Kael, the eldest, was a stonemason's son, the kind who watched more than he spoke. At 12, he could name the weight of limestone by touch, and at 15, he carved his own wooden training blade with more patience than most commanders had on the field. Beran was fire to Kael's stone, brash, loud, raised in a forge where sparks flew like birds. He dreamed not of battles but of songs sung about them. He had fists before he had finesse, but he had loyalty like breath, constant, unthinking, alive. Tomas was different. Born to a healer in the lowlands, his hands had stitched wounds long before they learned to carry steel. He joined the knight's path not to conquer, but to protect. He spoke little, but when he did, people listened. Not because his words were sharp, but because they were true. They met at 16. 3 strangers at the Queen's call, young, unproven, eager. Their first months were marked with bruises, blisters, exhaustion, and laughter. They shared stolen apples, fought mock duels in candlelight, and on one cursed night, carried a pig through a snowstorm just to win a dare. By the end of that winter, they no longer trained next to each other. They trained with each other. And by spring, they made the same vow beneath the oaken flame. In the vaulted hall, they knelt on the stone floor, torches casting long shadows. Old knights watched from above. A priest recited the oath. The Queen, only 24 herself, stood cloaked and silent at the head of the hall. We swear not to power, not to conquest, but to shield those who carry peace. We draw blades for no crown, only for the breath between battles. The 3 repeated it together. 3 voices, one shape. They touched blades, touched shoulders, and rose as one. The next 2 years were a blur of motion, training, service, frostbitten nights on the border, quiet rides beside the Queen's carriage. She came to trust them not because they were flawless, but because they failed and stood again. Kael became her shadow. Beran, her sword arm. Tomas, her eyes in the silence. Then came the autumn of the 4th year. Smoke rose from villages near the southern pass. Caravans vanished. The Queen, proud and restless, decided to travel south herself, quietly, without banners. She chose 8 guards. Kael, Beran, Tomas, and 5 others whose names would not survive the week. They departed in mist, before the sun dared rise. Kael rode point. Tomas rode beside the Queen, his calm presence like a second saddle. Beran brought up the rear, jesting with the cook's son, who rode the supply mule and had never seen real snow. The mountains ahead were quiet. The leaves were turning. And the road narrowed too soon. The attack began at dusk. It was not chaos, it was design. The first arrow struck the mule. The second took a guard through the throat. A third cut Tomas's shoulder before he could dismount. 12 riders emerged from the woods, not bandits in rags, but armed, armored, silent. Their faces covered in ash, their blades curved like hooks. Kael turned his horse hard, intercepting. Beran shouted and charged. Tomas stood over the Queen, even as blood soaked his sleeve. They fought like they had never trained to fight, not for points, not for pride. For survival. One of the guards fell. Then another. Kael parried a blade to his side but lost his footing. Beran broke a rider's ribs with his shield, roaring. The Queen did not scream. She whispered something only Tomas heard. And Kael saw him nod. Then she turned, spurred her horse, and vanished into the trees. The fight ended with breathless silence. 4 attackers dead. One fled. 3 guards fallen. And Tomas, white-faced, kneeling in the mud. Beran dropped beside him. Where? Tomas tried to answer. Blood bubbled on his lips. Kael crouched. The pass, he said. Highthollow is 2 days on foot. If we follow the ridge. Beran looked at the twisted corpses of their horses. On foot? Kael stood. We don't have a choice. They buried the dead quickly. No time for stones. Only whispered words and torn cloth. Kael cut straps to form a sling. Beran cleaned Tomas's wound with snow and wine. He did not cry. But when he stood, he punched a tree, hard, and shook with the effort not to fall apart. Tomas said only, I'm sorry. Kael touched his shoulder. Don't be. You stood. They took what they could. 1 skin of water. A knife. A blanket soaked in smoke. Dried figs from the cook's saddlebag. No horses. No map. No sound but the wind rising through the pines. The 3 walked into the cold. Kael with a sword in hand and a burden behind his eyes. Beran with fists clenched and a secret in his chest. Tomas, limping, bleeding, but alive. And the mountain watched them come. The climb began in silence. Not out of discipline. Not even out of pain. But because none of them had the words for what they were now walking through. The ground rose beneath their feet like a slow breath, uneven, damp, broken with moss and stone. Pines leaned close, their branches creaking in the wind. The early sun filtered through in blue shafts, soft and uncertain. Tomas limped between them, breath catching every 7th step. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes flickered from ground to sky as if trying to will himself into a different body. Beran supported him with a shoulder, muttering curses not at him, but at the slope. Kael walked ahead, sword slung low across his back, eyes moving left and right, reading the land like a quiet page. By the 2nd hour, they reached a stream, narrow, quick, bitter cold. Kael knelt, cupped the water, and drank. Beran didn't wait. He dropped to his knees, plunged both arms into the flow and splashed it over his face. Tomas sat. That was all he could do. Kael handed him water in a hollowed gourd. You need to drink. Tomas shook his head. Makes me sick. Kael didn't move. Better sick than dry. Tomas took the water. His hand trembled slightly. Beran sat back on a stone, breathing heavily. I hate this mountain. Kael, still crouched, didn't turn. It's just a hill. Beran snorted. Says the man with 2 working legs? Kael stood. Keep your strength for walking. Beran stared up at him. I am walking. I'm also carrying him. Kael's gaze shifted. So am I. Just differently. A moment hung between them, not anger, but wait. Tomas looked between them, then down at the water. Save it, he whispered. You'll need each other before the end. The trail steepened. Their boots slid in pine needles, scraped stone, broke patches of thin ice. A few birds flitted overhead, silent and fast. The sky narrowed between the trees. Kael kept the pace even. Too even. Beran struggled not to curse aloud. Tomas walked half-supported, half-stumbling. By midday they stopped. A crooked stump served as a bench. The wind was sharper here, blowing down from unseen ridges. Kael pulled bread from his satchel. Dry. Dense. He broke it into 3. Beran took his piece without comment. Tomas chewed slowly, eyes glazed. Kael sat last. He faced upslope, watching how the shadows curled between the trees. Beran finally broke the quiet. Did you see the queen's face before she fled? Kael nodded once. She looked back. Just once. Tomas murmured. That's more than most would. Beran stared into the trees. Still doesn't feel like much, Kael said. She knew we'd hold. Beran's jaw clenched. She knew we'd bleed. Later they walked again. The slope was less steep, but rockier. Moss coated half the stones. The others were slick with melt. Twice, Beran nearly lost his footing. Once, Tomas did, and Kael caught him without a word. They passed a tree that had split in two, hollowed by lightning. Inside, something had scratched runes into the bark. Kael paused to study them. "What is it?" Tomas asked. "Warning," Kael said. "Or memory." Beran snorted. "Same thing." Near sunset, they reached a narrow shelf above a low ravine. Just wide enough to lie down. Just high enough to fall. Kael dropped his pack. "We'll sleep here." Beran glanced up the trail. "We've got light." "Not enough." Beran didn't argue further. He dropped beside Tomas, who was already slipping towards sleep. They built no fire. The wind carried too far here. Kael passed dried meat to both of them. They ate without taste. Tomas's voice broke the silence. "What if this is where it ends?" Neither answered. "Not at first." Then Kael said, "Then we'll make it a quiet ending." Tomas chuckled, then grimaced. "Not quite the song Beran was hoping for." Beran shifted. "Don't care about songs. I just don't want to be forgotten in a ravine." "You won't be," Kael said. "You can't promise that." "I'm not," Kael replied. "I'm remembering it now." That night Kael took first watch. The stars overhead flickered weakly through the clouds. The wind whispered nonsense in the trees. Below, some animal howled once, then fell silent. Beran slept with a dagger in hand. Tomas breathed shallowly, mouth open, face pale. Kael sat with eyes half closed, not resting, not fully awake. Then he saw them. Footprints, just beyond the trail. Small. Light. Barefoot. Too small for any of them. Too recent for comfort. Kael stood slowly. Examined the pattern. Not just someone passing by. Someone circling. He returned to the shelf and crouched near Beran. "Wake!" Quietly. Beran stirred, blinked once, then nodded. Kael whispered, "We're not alone." Beran reached for his sword without sound. The forest didn't move. But it listened. The forest didn't move. But it watched. That was how it felt, standing there on the ledge above the ravine, eyes unseen, breath held behind bark and bramble. Kael had spotted the footprints first. Small, barefoot, too fresh for comfort. They weren't wandering tracks. They circled. Intentional. As if someone had walked around their camp slowly, then vanished into the trees. Beran had risen, sword half drawn. Tomas, still pale with pain, tried to sit upright but winced. "We're not alone," Kael said again, quieter this time. Beran stepped past the fire's ashes, scanning the undergrowth. No sound. Then, a shape. Not charging. Not hiding. Just standing. A child. Thin. Wrapped in a fur-lined cloak too large for him, face nearly hidden beneath a hood. No weapon. No words. Just dark, steady eyes. Kael held up a hand, palm open, a peace gesture. The boy tilted his head. Blinked slowly. Then turned, stepped back toward the trees, and looked over his shoulder. Inviting. "Wait," Beran said. "What is this?" Kael didn't hesitate. "He wants us to follow. Or wants us dead in a trap." Kael looked to Tomas. "We won't get far today without help." Tomas nodded faintly. Something in his eyes. "I don't feel fear." Beran cursed under his breath, but slung his blade and moved to Tomas's side. They followed the boy. He moved quickly through the undergrowth, silent as wind. Sometimes he vanished between trees, only to reappear further ahead. Never out of reach, just enough to test their will to follow. The slope curled downward, then upward again, winding along a deer path littered with pine cones and melting patches of snow. The trees thickened. Crows shifted in the branches overhead, but made no sound. Tomas leaned heavier on Beran now. Kael led with narrowed eyes, hand never far from the hilt. After nearly an hour, they reached a clearing. And there, nestled against a crooked granite boulder, stood a hut. Old. Round. Built half into the stone itself. Smoke drifted from a thin chimney. Dried herbs hung in bundles from the awning. A small wooden stool sat outside the door, cracked and moss-lined. The boy stopped near the entrance. He gestured to the hut, then to Tomas. Then sat on the stump. Silent again. Kael approached the door first. Knocked. No answer. He opened it slowly. Inside, warmth. A hearth still glowing. Blankets. Shelves full of jars and bundles. It smelled of thyme, mint, and wood smoke. Empty, Kael said. Tomas, shivering, was guided inside by Beran. Beran looked to the boy. Who are you? The boy didn't answer. Just watched them, chin tilted slightly. Inside the hut, Tomas lay on a mat. Kael examined his bandages, soaked again. The leg was swollen now. Red. Angry. Beran leaned in the doorway. If no one lives here, we need to leave. This could be. A sound. From the woods. Steps. Beran spun, hand to hilt. But the boy didn't move. A moment later, an old man stepped from the trees. Tall, hunched, shoulders broad, hair gray and bound back in cord. His hands were stained with sap and soil. Eyes sharp, golden brown, and ancient. He carried a satchel of moss and roots. He looked at them. At Tomas. At the boy. And then nodded. No words were spoken. The man entered the hut, knelt beside Tomas, and unwrapped the bandage. His fingers were steady. Fast. He hummed softly, a deep, resonant tone. From his satchel, he withdrew a dark blue cloth, a root shaped like a bent finger, and a tiny stone bottle. He pressed the root into a bowl, ground it with a stone, mixed the powder with drops from the bottle, and dipped the cloth. When he placed it on Tomas's wound, Tomas gasped. Then sighed. Then slept. Kael and Beran watched in silence. The old man looked at them once, long and deep. Then returned to humming. Later, they sat outside by the hearth as dusk fell. The boy still hadn't spoken. He sat near Tomas's feet, folding small leaves between his fingers and watching the steam rise from a pot. Kael finally asked, Is he your son? The old man shook his head. No. Beran pressed. Who is he then? The man's voice was low, sanded calm. He finds the ones who need the way. I offer warmth. He offers will. Kael said. Why us? The man looked to the fire. Because you still carry a promise. And pain. They ate simple stew. Roots, herbs, something gamey but soft. Tomas stirred once or twice but did not wake. Beran sat with his back to the wall, arms crossed. I still don't trust this. Kael asked. Do you trust him less than the mountain? Beran didn't answer. That night they slept indoors, the first roof in days. The air smelled of moss and medicine. Tomas's breathing was easier now. Color had returned to his cheeks. Kael lay awake long after Beran began to snore. And in the hush of the hut, the boy rose. He walked over to Kael, placed something in his palm, a tiny carved feather of pale wood. Kael whispered, What's this for? The boy didn't speak. But he pointed to Tomas. Then to Kael. Then placed a hand to his own chest. And smiled. By morning the boy and the man were gone. No tracks. Only an empty cup of tea left steaming on the stoop. Tomas sat up fully, blinking. I had the strangest dream. He said. A bird made of bark flew around my head and said, Only the wounded may pass. Beran rubbed his eyes. Then you're the only one invited. Kael looked at the carved feather in his palm. Then pocketed it. And said, Let's go. The morning broke cold. Not biting, not cruel. Just that damp, steady chill that seeps into boots and behind shoulders. The kind of cold that says, You've stayed too long, now move. They left the hut just past dawn. No sign of the boy. No trace of the old man. Only steam still curling from the tea left behind, and Tomas walking, slowly, carefully, but walking on his own. Are you sure? Kael had asked quietly before they left. Tomas had nodded. The pain's there, yes. But I can feel my leg again. Beran had added with a smirk. Good. I was starting to get used to the silence. They all laughed. Just a little. But it was real. The climb resumed. The path the boy had shown them was narrow, half-hidden, winding through the evergreens in a zigzag that climbed sharper with each turn. By midday, clouds had rolled in, and snow began to fall, not heavy, but steady, like someone shaking dust from the sky. Kael led, his cloak wrapped tight, jaw set. His eyes scanned not just the trail, but the trees beyond. Since the footprints, he hadn't dropped his guard. Beran walked behind Tomas, not hovering, but never far. Every now and then, he muttered complaints. This isn't a path. This is a goat's bad decision. Tomas, still pale, grinned. You're welcome to turn back. Beran groaned. And Miss Kael's uplifting company? Never. It was the snow that muffled the world. It swallowed the crunch of steps, the rustle of branches, the slow ache of the wind. It made the forest feel farther, like even the trees were holding their breath. So when they heard the voice, they all stopped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted. It was spoken, soft, and somehow, behind them, a whisper carried on air, low and familiar. Kael turned. Nothing. Beran spun, hand on hilt. Who said that? Tomas had gone still. I heard. He began. Then they heard it again. 3 voices. 3 different voices. Each one heard someone they knew. Kael heard his father. A voice long dead. You always leave things half-built, Kael. What makes you think a life is any different? He froze. The air inside his lungs stiffened. Beran heard his brother, the one who'd vanished during the rebellion years ago. Still playing hero, little hammer? Still pretending steel makes you strong? His fists clenched. Tomas heard his mother. Gentle. Wounded. You were never meant for blades, my son. You had healer's hands. Why did you follow their path? His eyes burned. Not from snow. Kael moved first. Something's ahead. They pressed on. Quiet now. More careful. The snow deepened. Their breaths rose like smoke. And then, at the bend of the ridge, a tree. Massive. Twisted. Gnarled roots clawing into the slope. Its trunk was split in the center, hollow, blackened, not burned but empty. Carved into its bark were symbols, old, half-erased, curving like vines. Hanging from its limbs, ropes of bark, strings of bones, tiny bells. None of them moved in the wind. Beran stopped. What in the hells is that? Tomas whispered. An echo tree. Kael looked at him. You know it? My mother spoke of them. Trees that hold voices. That speak the truth no one says aloud? Beran frowned. Truth or madness? Tomas shrugged. Both. Kael stepped closer. Inside the hollow, darkness thickened, not just shadow, but absence. It felt, waiting. He heard the voice again. Louder this time. You let her ride off. You let your men die. You failed. Kael turned his head sharply. No one was there. Beran took a step toward the tree, then froze. His lips parted, like hearing a name no one should know. He turned to Kael. I think it sees us. Suddenly the bells rang. No wind. But they rang. Tomas staggered. His leg gave out. He fell to one knee and covered his ears. The air hummed. Then came the voices again, not whispers now. Not distant. Inside their minds. You let him fall. You break before you bend. You carry a blade, but not conviction. 3 voices. 1 for each. The tree had judged them. Kael drew his blade. Beran reached for Tomas and pulled him back. Kael stood between them and the tree. Then, the wind stopped. The bells fell silent. And the tree sighed. Like something had passed. Then came a different voice. Not condemning. Not cruel. A woman's voice. Familiar. Comforting. But none of them recognized it. You are not the only ones walking the mountain. Then silence. They stood there, breathing hard, the snow still falling, light and soft as ash. Beran muttered, "What in all the gods' names was that?" Tomas exhaled slowly. "Not enemy. Not friend. Just old." Kael wiped sweat from his brow, though the air was freezing. "We keep moving." But they didn't forget. That night, as they camped beneath a rock shelf, huddled close around a smokeless fire, none of them spoke for a long while. Until Beran said, "That voice, it knew my brother's name." Tomas replied, "Mine knew how I left my mother's bed the day she died." Kael didn't speak, but in his fist was a shard of bark, black, ridged, and warm. He didn't remember picking it up. But he kept it. The snow thickened. It didn't fall harder, just steadier, the way silence deepens with each breath you hold. Their boots broke crusted patches, their cloaks turned heavy. Wind slid between seams, under collars, around wrists. The mountain was colder now. Not just in weather, but in mood. By midday, Tomas was slowing again. He said little, but Kael noticed the subtle things, how he leaned more when walking, how his lips paled, how the breath between steps shortened. Beran saw it too, but he said nothing. Until Tomas stumbled. Hard. Kael caught him before he fell fully, crouched beside him in the snow. Beran dropped his pack and knelt. "How bad?" Tomas winced, then gave a small smile. "Still breathing." Beran touched his forehead. "You're warm." Tomas nodded. "That's the problem." Kael scanned the ridge. They had no shelter. No cave. No firewood. Just one narrow path and miles of white. "We can't stop here," he said. Beran asked, "Then where?" Tomas coughed once. "There was a hut." The boy, he pointed north, not west. Kael hesitated. That way veered from their route. Beran stood, looked over the rise. Then he froze. "There's smoke," he said. They climbed another 15 minutes, Tomas half-carried now, until they saw it. A hut. Built into the earth itself. Not wood, not stone, moss layered and shaped like bricks. The roof sloped with green-brown thatch, and smoke curled from a crooked chimney of woven sticks. A door stood open. Not wide. Just enough. Kael approached, hand on hilt. Beran followed, blade drawn. Inside, warm air. Dim fire. Scent of sage, bloodroot, and iron. Then, a voice. Low. Gravelly. Dry as frost. "One of you burns. The other carries it. The third forgets how to feel." From the shadows stepped an old man. Taller than expected. Cloaked in rags and moss, hair long and streaked with gray and green. His eyes were yellow, not sickly, but like lichen caught in sunlight. Around his neck hung dozens of charms, teeth, feathers, carved wood, thorned vines. Kael stiffened. Beran raised his sword. The man didn't blink. He looked at Tomas. "Lay him down." They obeyed. Because somehow, they knew to. Tomas was set on a bed of furs thick with dried herbs. The man knelt beside him, fingers brushing over his leg without touching the wound. He didn't ask. He knew. He opened a wooden chest, withdrew a paste the color of ash, a curved needle of bone, and a flask of dark liquid. He worked in silence. No incantations. No prayers. Only movement, measured and slow. Tomas gasped once as the paste touched skin. Then, stillness. His breath slowed. His color returned. He slept. Kael exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd held. Beran wiped a hand over his face, then turned to the old man. "What are you?" The man smiled. Not kindly. Not cruelly. Just knowingly. "I am the one the mountain leaves behind. I am the one who never wanted to climb." He looked at Kael. "But you did." Then to Beran. "You followed because you needed to matter." Then to Tomas softly. "And you came because you forgot how not to give." Kael's hand tightened. "What do you want?" The man chuckled. "You still think this is about want." He stood. Gestured to a pot near the fire. drink, rest. But know this, healing has nothing to do with flesh. He walked to the far wall, knelt before a bundle of dried leaves, and began to sort them. They stayed 2 nights. Tomas regained strength, slow but steady. On the second evening, as snow fell soft beyond the moss walls, the man spoke again, not to them directly, but to the room. She is not alone. Kael turned. The man didn't look at him. Your queen. She rides with someone. Someone who knows your names. Beran straightened. Who? No answer. Only. He waits at the edge of the hollow, where the bells never ring. Kael whispered. Highthollow. The man smiled, but didn't confirm. That night Kael couldn't sleep. He walked outside into the snow, looked up at the stars. Beran joined him minutes later. Do you believe him? Kael asked. Beran shook his head. I believe the way Tomas looked after he touched that fire. Kael said nothing. Beran added, We're not the same men who swore the oath. Kael replied, No. Then, but the oath still stands. When dawn came, they packed. The old man gave Tomas a cane carved with spirals and a knot of braided grass. To Kael, a pouch of black powder. To Beran, a question. When will you stop fighting shadows? Beran had no answer. As they left, Kael looked back once. The moss hut was gone, as if it had never been. Only the smoke remained, spiraling skyward, like a signal no one would see. They awoke to silence. Not peace, but the kind of silence that presses into the ears, that tightens around the ribs, that warns. Even the wind had stopped. Kael stood just beyond the edge of the cave, watching the sky change. Above the pines, clouds churned like smoke under glass, bruised purple and deep ochre. The light was wrong, not dawn, not dusk. Something in between unsettled. Beran emerged, cloak pulled tight. That sky doesn't like us, he muttered. Kael didn't respond. Behind them, Tomas stirred, sitting up with effort. His leg ached, not sharp pain, but that dull, deep warning kind that came before the body betrayed itself. They ate quickly. No words. By mid-morning, they were walking again, or trying to. The trail had narrowed into an uneven thread of broken stone and snow-dusted roots. Branches clawed at their cloaks. The air thickened with cold moisture that clung to hair and brows. I don't recognize any of this, Kael said finally. Beran gave him a sharp look. We're lost? We're off the marked ridge. So yes. Kael exhaled through his nose. Keep moving. By midday, the snow began to fall. Heavy this time. Thick, clumping flakes that turned sky to parchment and swallowed depth. Kael narrowed his eyes. He knew this kind of storm. It didn't want to freeze you. It wanted to erase you. Slower, he ordered. Watch your steps. Beran grunted. Not like we're sprinting. Tomas leaned on his cane. Something's off. They turned a bend, and then it happened. A sound like a tree splitting. No, earth breaking. Kael looked up just in time to see a chunk of ridge ahead crack, stone crumbling, snow sliding, branches tearing free in a sudden avalanche that wasn't made of ice but mud, root, and earth. Down! He shouted. They scattered. A wave of earth sheared off, taking with it the very trail they were on, sending it sliding down the mountain like a carpet pulled too hard. When it stopped, they were standing on nothing familiar. Silence. Just their breaths. And the slope gone. Kael crept forward, heart pounding. The path that had guided them for days led from the Mosswalker's trail, through the echo tree, toward the ridge before Highthollow, was now a scar. Gone. Beran cursed. Not softly. Loud and raw. Tomas sat on a stone, eyes wide. Was anyone hurt? No, Kael said. Not yet. Beran turned to him, breathing hard. We should have turned back at the tree. This isn't a path. This is the mountain chewing us up. We knew the risk. No. You knew the plan. You never asked if we wanted to keep following your gut. Tomas looked up. Beran. No, Beran snapped. You were near death. He was the one steering. Kael stood straighter. So what? We run back? With no trail and no time? Beran stepped toward him. Don't act like this is strategy. This is penance. You think if we just keep walking, we'll undo what happened in the valley? Kael's jaw tightened. You blame me for that? I blame you for not letting yourself break. Not even once. The words hung in the frozen air. Tomas stood. Painfully. Slowly. Stop it. Both turned. Tomas's face was pale, but steady. We're all breaking. We're just doing it differently. Kael looked away. Beran sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. For hours, they walked along whatever semblance of slope they could find, sideways through dense brush, sliding across wet stone. Snow blurred everything. Trees looked like ghosts. At one point, Tomas slipped. Kael caught him. Beran reached out too late, and swore under his breath again. They found a rock hollow near dusk, a space between two jutting cliffs, shielded from wind. Enough room for a fire. Just enough. Kael struck flint. Beran built the frame. Tomas sat wrapped in both cloaks. No one spoke for a long time. When the fire finally caught, Tomas whispered, I dreamt of her last night. Kael looked up. Alarin, Tomas said. The queen. She stood on a riverbank. Alone. She wasn't crying, but she looked like she had. Beran rubbed his hands near the flame. She's still alive. Kael's voice was quiet. Beran looked at him. You think so? I know so. Later, as sleep began to claim them one by one, Tomas lay awake. Snow fell outside, silent and soft again. He stared into the flames. And somewhere, between the embers in the dark, he heard a voice. Soft. Gentle. His own. What if they're better off without you? He flinched. Then sat up. But the others slept. The fire whispered. And the mountain waited. The storm struck just before sunset. No warning this time. One moment the snow was falling in lazy drifts. The next, the wind howled through the mountains like a beast loosed from chains. It tore through branches, threw knives of ice into their faces, and turned the sky to a wall of white. They couldn't see 5 paces ahead. Kael led, head bowed, one hand outstretched. Tomas leaned heavily on Beran now, his cane nearly useless in the wind. Every step was a fight. Then Kael shouted, not a word, just a bark of sound, and veered left. There it was. A cave. Low. Crag-toothed. Hidden behind twisted brush and a sheet of fallen snow. The kind of place you would pass unless the mountain pushed you into it. They collapsed inside. Tomas dropped first, breath ragged, face wet with snowmelt. Beran followed, coughing, shaking snow from his beard. Kael was last in, pulling the brush back in place to dull the wind. The cave was narrow at first, then widened into a long-bellied chamber that sloped slightly downward. Dry. Cold. Still. And safe. Kael knelt beside Tomas, checked his leg. Still flushed. But no worse. Beran struck flint. After 4 failed tries, sparks caught. A fire bloomed in a shallow pit of old ash. Someone had once used this place. They didn't speak for some time. Just breathed. And listened to the wind scream outside. Later, Kael explored deeper into the cave. The light from the fire flickered along the stone walls, revealing faded chalk marks, lines, symbols, too smudged to read. He paused. Then froze. Footprints. Not theirs. Small. Bare. Fresh. He turned fast. Someone's here. Beran had already stood. Sword drawn. Tomas rose slowly, pressing a hand to the cave wall for balance. Then came a soft noise, not speech. A rustling. Like someone shifting blankets. And there, deeper in the shadows, huddled near a crack in the stone. A woman. She was wrapped in old cloaks, layered with stitched hides. Her hair was gray and braided down the side. Her skin was dark with soot and travel, her eyes pale as morning fog. Around her neck hung a ring of keys, none the same size. She didn't speak, just watched them. Kael lowered his blade slightly. We didn't know anyone was here. She smiled faintly. I know. Her voice was low, smooth, tired. Accent foreign, not from their kingdom. Beran asked. Who are you? She tilted her head. You may call me Nara. Kael frowned. Why are you in the mountains? She chuckled softly. Same as you, I imagine. Looking for something I lost. She shifted closer to the fire. The light revealed a satchel filled with scraps, broken jewelry, a cracked comb, a small jar of peppered roots. Tomas asked gently. Are you a traveler? I was, she said. Now I'm more a finder. What do you find? Beran asked, suspicious still. Nara held up a shard of mirror. Things others forget. Things the mountain keeps. They shared food. She offered nothing in return but stories, short ones, half-finished. I met a man once who believed mountains were sleeping gods. He slept with his head on stone for 7 nights until he dreamed of thunder. There's a place 2 ridges west where the wind hums like a mother. I lost a name there. I haven't found it since. Once, I saw a fire walk uphill. No wood. No feet. Just flame. It stopped beside me and whispered a name I never told anyone. Tomas asked, Do you believe those things? Nara looked at him. I don't need to. I only carry them. As the night deepened, the storm raged louder. Snow drove against the cliffs. The fire popped. Kael sat apart, sharpening his blade. Tomas dozed. Beran stood at the mouth of the cave, watching the wind dance past. Then, softly, he spoke. I was supposed to die. Kael looked up. Tomas stirred. Beran didn't turn around. In the valley. When they attacked. I was supposed to ride with the queen. Take her north. Tomas frowned. Then why? She gave the order to Kael. Not me. He turned now. She trusted him. Not me. Kael said nothing. Beran stepped closer to the fire. I waited for my moment. Wanted to prove I was worth more than a sword. So I hesitated. She gave the order, and I let it go. He sat. I'm not angry you let her out, Kael. I'm angry I didn't move. Silence followed. Then Nara spoke. Soft. Even. You carry more than guilt. You carry unfinished. That's heavier. Beran looked at her. Then down. Then, for the first time since the valley, he wept. Quietly. One hand pressed to his eyes. Kael reached over, rested a hand on his shoulder. No words. But the touch said, You're still here. That's enough. The storm began to break by dawn. Snow lightened. Wind softened. Nara stood at the cave's edge, looking out. Kael approached her. What will you do now? She smiled thinly. I'll wait for what I've lost. If it wants to find me, it knows where I sleep. She reached into her satchel. Pulled out a small chain, a charm in the shape of a mountain's curve. Take it, she said to Kael. It opens nothing. But it may remind you when the doors inside you are still locked. When they left the cave, she was still there. Humming to herself. A woman with a ring of keys for locks that no longer exist. And a fire that burned long after they turned away. The air changed again. It wasn't the cold. That had settled into their bones days ago. It wasn't the snow, either, that fell now only in thin veils, quiet and slow. It was something else. A shift beneath the world, subtle but certain. A stillness. Like the mountain was watching them. Or waiting. Kael felt it first, that faint hum beneath his boots, like stepping onto hollow ground. Tomas, walking behind him with slow but steady breath, noticed it too, the weight in the air, like an old chapel before the bells. Beran simply grew quieter, eyes scanning the trees more than usual. No one spoke. The path wound forward, curling between frostbitten trees and ridges layered with snow. The sun was out, but dim, filtered through mist. Light without heat. The trail narrowed, sloped gently upward. At the ridge, the trees gave way to open air, and Kael stopped suddenly. The others followed his gaze. There, standing beside a leaning, lichen-covered stone cross, was a man. He didn't move. Didn't wave, didn't draw steel. He simply waited. Wrapped in a long gray coat, patched at the elbows, boots cracked and mended more than once. His beard was short, salt and pepper, and his staff was tall, worn smooth with age. Around his neck hung a cord strung with brass rings and a raven's feather. The wind stirred his coat. But no snow landed on him. Kael's voice was low. "You see him too?" Tomas nodded. "He's real." Beran's hand drifted to the hilt of his sword. "Question is he alive?" They approached slowly. 12 paces. 10. 5. The man smiled. "Not often you three come by this way," he said, as if greeting old friends. "Though I suppose it's not your fault this is your first time." Kael narrowed his eyes. "You know who we are?" The man shrugged. "I know enough. I know what you've lost. What you've nearly found. What you carry and what you pretend not to." He gestured to the cross. "Most pass by without noticing. But not you. You've all been marked by crossroads. One more won't hurt." Beran crossed his arms. "What do you want?" "Nothing. But I offer." Tomas asked gently. "What do you offer?" The man's smile faded slightly. "News." He pointed east toward the slopes below. "There's fire in the valley. Smoke rose 2 days ago. The village of Highthollow woke early, to a rider. Alone. No guards. Torn cloak." Kael felt his stomach knot. Beran's eyes sharpened. "Her?" The man nodded. "She came on a pale horse. Mud-soaked, half-starved. She made it." Kael stepped forward. "Is she safe?" The man met his eyes. "She's breathing. But safety, that depends on who you think is watching her." Silence fell. Tomas swallowed. "She wasn't alone?" "No," the man said. "She rode beside a man in gray. Not a soldier. Not from court. He doesn't bow. And she lets him ride close." Beran muttered. "Too close." Kael said nothing, but his jaw clenched. "She trusts him," the man added. "Or wants to." "Why are you telling us this?" Kael asked. The man gestured to the cross again. "This is where paths split. Or return. I tell those who reach it, because the mountain doesn't." Tomas whispered. "Are we too late?" The man shook his head. "No. But you're almost too changed to remember what you came for." He looked at each of them. Kael, still holding the sword, but not the reason. Tomas, healer's hands, but a soldier's guilt. Beran, brave enough to bleed, but afraid to bend. He sighed. "You'll reach Highthollow before night. But if you walk in like men who want answers, you'll find lies. If you walk in like men who remember what it means to serve, you might find the truth." Then, without turning, he added, "She'll be glad to see you, Kael. But she may not let you stay." The wind stirred. The man stepped aside, gesturing toward the path ahead, a narrow bend leading down into the valley, almost hidden in snow. He smiled once more. Then sat beside the cross, as if waiting for someone else. They walked in silence for nearly an hour. No one spoke. The path descended gently at first, then sharpened, winding between stone pillars and old trees bent by snow. Eventually, Beran broke the quiet. "Do you believe him?" Kael didn't answer right away. Tomas did. "I believe the mountain puts people in our path for a reason." Beran shook his head. "I don't know if I want to see her anymore." Kael glanced at him. Beran added, "Not if she's become someone we can't protect." They stopped to rest beside a half-frozen stream. Kael crouched, letting cold water run through his fingers. Tomas sat nearby, unwrapping a bit of bread, quietly chewing. Beran stood a little apart, watching the ridge behind them. Finally Kael said, "We made an oath. Not to who she was, but to who we are when we serve." Tomas nodded. Beran didn't. But he didn't argue. By dusk, they reached the high edge of the valley. Below Highthollow, a town of stone and wood, roofs steep and dark against the snow. Smoke curled from chimneys. A bell tower stood at the far end, crooked slightly left, not broken, just tired. Light flickered behind frost-fogged windows. It wasn't grand. But it was there. Alive. Kael stepped forward, breath fogging. "She's down there," Beran asked. "Do we go in tonight?" Tomas said. "We've come too far to sleep outside now." Kael looked at them both. Then down the hill, toward the firelight waiting for them. He exhaled. "Let's finish the road." The light changed as they stepped into the valley. It wasn't just the sun, though it hung lower now, amber through the mist. It wasn't even the snow, which had softened to a fine powder beneath their boots. It was the air, gentler, warmer, laced with hearth smoke and something else. Hope. Not loud. Just present. The road into Highthollow wound between stone outcroppings and crooked trees, their trunks carved with faint old sigils, moss-eaten, forgotten. As they approached the gate, Tomas paused to catch his breath. Beran adjusted the straps on his pack. Kael said nothing, but his hand brushed the hilt at his side, then fell away. He wouldn't need a sword here. He hoped. The town itself was small, perhaps 20 buildings in all, roofed with blackened slate, chimneys tilting at strange angles. A few farms spread across the lower slopes, pens filled with goats, and chickens who paid no mind to the new arrivals. But the people noticed. Old eyes peered from behind wooden shutters. A blacksmith paused mid-swing, lowering her hammer. 2 boys stopped chasing each other to stare in silence as the 3 passed by. Not with fear, but with recognition. As if someone had described them in a story once, and now they'd stepped off the page. Kael felt it too. That strange weight. Like they were being seen, not just watched. At the town's center stood a frozen well ringed in flat stones. Nearby, a man with a cane leaned against a bench, puffing a short-stemmed pipe. 3 shadows from the ridge, he said as they neared. "Can't say we didn't expect you." Beran raised a brow. "We?" The man grinned, revealing a gold tooth. "Word travels fast here. Even faster through smoke." He tapped the pipe. "The Queen came, on the 3rd day of frost. Wounded but walking. Had that look on her like she'd seen the end of a world, and didn't run from it." Tomas stepped closer. "She's alive?" "Aye. She rests now. But not idly." Kael asked. "Where?" The man shrugged. "She stays in the chapel for now. Keeps to herself, mostly. Sees few. But she asked to be told if 3 old ghosts came from the ridge." He pointed. "To the White Door Inn. West Quarter. Go there. Talk to Mira. She'll know." The inn was older than it looked from the outside. Narrow hallways, thick oak beams, floors that groaned with every step, not in protest, but like a welcome. At the hearth stood a woman with salt-colored hair and sharp eyes. She looked up as the door opened, and smiled without surprise. "Kael. Tomas. Beran." They blinked. Beran asked, "Do we know you?" She laughed softly. "Not really. But I watched you fight once. In the southern keep. You carried a flag back when no one thought you'd stand." Kael said slowly. "You were in the Queen's company?" Mira nodded. "A scribe. And sometimes, a listener." She gestured to a table near the fire. "Come. You've earned more than warmth." They sat. She brought stew, heavy with root vegetables and a hint of spice. Warm cider, soft bread. For a while, no one spoke. Just eating. The sound of spoons, firewood cracking, wind brushing the windows. Then Mira spoke. "She came alone," she said. "Or so it seemed. But for a man in gray, quiet, sharp. He didn't speak in the inn. But she listened when he did. Kael stiffened. Tomas watched him. What else? She walks often. At night. Says little. But she asked me for one thing. Mira looked directly at Kael. If they come, let them choose. Later, Mira led them upstairs to 3 small rooms. 1 each. Tomas looked at his door for a long time before entering. Beran stood in his frame, hands in pockets, not going in, not staying out. Kael entered, sat at the window, and stared into the quiet snowfall. That night, each dreamed again. Kael saw the queen sitting beside a river. She held his blade in her lap. She didn't cry. She simply waited. Tomas dreamed of walking among the wounded again, but this time, no one asked him for healing. They simply nodded. As if to say, it's enough. Beran stood in a field of broken weapons, and in the distance, heard laughter. Not cruel, but free. Near dawn, someone knocked softly on each of their doors. Myra's voice. She's ready. They dressed slowly. Tomas tied his cloak carefully, brushing invisible dust from the seams. Beran tightened his bracers, though he knew he wouldn't need them. Kael wore no armor. Only the blade, not drawn, not shown. They stepped outside together. The snow had stopped. The road was clear. And just beyond it, the chapel bell rang, once, then fell silent. As if to say, now. The chapel stood in stillness at the edge of Highthollow. Surrounded by bare trees and pale stone, it rose without grandeur, modest, weather-worn, and silent. A single stained-glass window overlooked the frost-covered garden where Kael, Tomas, and Beran stood now, cloaks fluttering softly in the morning breeze. They had arrived without an escort. But someone was already waiting. Mira opened the door for them. She's expecting you, she said. But not for ceremony. Beran nodded. Good. We left those behind. Inside, the air was warm, scented faintly with beeswax, rosemary, and parchment. Candles lined the walls. The old wooden pews sat half-lit in gold. There was no altar, only a simple stone table and a circle of 4 chairs near the fire. She stood by the hearth, alone. Queen Alrin. Her hair was unbound, dark with a streak of silver at the temples. Her clothes were simple, wool and leather, no sigils, no armor. One hand rested on a book, the other, on a piece of folded cloth, a torn royal banner. She turned as they entered. Her eyes, familiar and older now. Sharper. And softer. For a breath, no one moved. Then Kael stepped forward, removed his cloak, and placed a hand over his heart. My queen. She shook her head gently. Not here, she said. Not now. They gathered around the hearth. No ceremony. Just presence. Beran leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Tomas sat with his cane beside him, fingers resting lightly on his knee. Kael, he sat with perfect stillness, eyes on the queen, waiting. She began slowly. I remember the moment I gave the order to run, she said. There was an arrow through the cook's boy. Fire behind us. A horse rearing. And Kael, you were looking at me, not at the fight. Kael nodded. I was waiting. I knew, she said. I knew if I nodded you'd obey. She looked at each of them. I did not know if you would follow. Or if you should. Tomas replied softly. We didn't follow you, my queen. We followed the oath. Beran added. And each other. Alrin closed her eyes for a moment. When I reached Highthollow, I was not alone. A man, you heard of him. He calls himself Quiet. He guided me from the southern pass when I was bleeding, barely breathing. He gave no name. But he spoke with wisdom that wasn't mine. She turned to the banner on the table. I asked myself what I was, queen? Survivor? Burden? She looked at Kael. You've walked far. But what did you find? Kael was silent for a long time. Then said, a voice I never heard before. My own. Tomas leaned forward. I found that I can choose again. Not just serve, but heal because I want to. Beran smiled faintly. I found I don't have to be angry to be brave. Alarin listened. Then she stood. Walked to the window. The war will not come. Not now. The kings have spoken. Our enemies sleep in wealth again. She turned. So, what do men do when they no longer have something to fight? Silence. Then Kael said, They remember. She approached them slowly. Held out 3 items. To Tomas, a polished stone, etched with the old healer's rune. To Beran, a copper ring, tarnished but strong. To Kael, a folded letter unsealed. No more orders, she said. Only gratitude. Only choice. She stepped back. I'm not asking you to stay. Nor to leave. She smiled. But whatever you do, do it as the men you became. That night, Highthollow was quiet. Tomas sat outside the inn, watching lanterns sway in the cold. A child approached with a carved wooden bird and offered it shyly. He smiled and showed her how to balance it in the wind. Beran helped Mira stack near the barn. They shared no stories, only glances that said more. Kael stood at the chapel steps, rereading the Queen's letter by candlelight. It wasn't long. Only 12 words. You carried me once. Now carry what you've become, with grace. The next morning, frost shimmered like glass across the fields. They gathered at the edge of the village, where the road split 3 ways. Kael looked north. Tomas east. Beran west. They stood in silence. Then Beran said, We could stay. Kael smiled. But we won't. Tomas chuckled. I might. For a while. Kael offered his hand. Beran clasped it. Then Tomas. They didn't say farewell. Only, see you again, when the road turns. Kael walked north, toward the riverlands. Tomas remained, to teach, to learn, to help. Beran followed the sun, not to find something, but to be surprised. The Queen stood at her window long after they'd gone. She watched the mist rise, and whispered, Still sworn, still true. And the wind carried their names, not as knights, but as men who remembered what it meant to hold an oath, and then live beyond it. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Though the path ends here, the memory remains, of friendship, of choice, of quiet strength. If this story brought you peace, consider subscribing for more tales told by firelight. Until next time. Rest well, traveler.